first of all, regen ag is not the same thing as regen ag. Okay, great. Putting that aside, that's not the same thing as soil carbon, which is not the same thing as soil health, which is not the same thing as carbon farming, which is not the same thing as low carbon intensity.
Coming up, we're talking about measuring soil carbon with the founder of Yardstick. The Modern Acre podcast explores the latest in business, investing, technology, and sustainability in agriculture, and we're your hosts, Tyler and Tim Nuss. If you'd like to dig deeper with The Modern Acre, be sure to check out our membership community, The Modern Acre Co-op. The Modern Acre podcast is presented by Pinion. The economics of farming are increasingly difficult, and many producers are asking Pinion, the leading food and ag business advisory firm, questions around thin margins and cash flow. Farmers want to know how to calculate the total cost of running the business and determine their farm's true break-even. The answer is twofold. First, calculating beyond the field is critical. Second, ensure you know your true costs. If you're struggling with this, Pinion advisors can perform financial calculations that identify places to cut expenses and ways to optimize your farm business. Learn more at pinionglobal.com or hit the link in our show notes.
So Ty, big news in the ag community last week. Our worlds are kind of colliding. Brock Purdy and the 49ers and John Deere doing a little action together, but John Deere is hiring a chief tractor officer. We were pumped when we saw this news. Huge 49ers fans. Awesome that Brock is on the John Deere team. I don't know if we have enough bandwidth to apply, Ty, but super interesting. Looks like an awesome role.
Yeah, first off, this is super savvy by John Deere. I love it. It is just making this competition around a role on the team. It's a contract position with John Deere. It's honestly, I joked with our dad that it's his dream job. I think, chief tractor officer. I don't know how dad would do with the social media content portion of it, but it's a great name. And I think, a great idea by John Deere. Tim, do you think they would accept co-chief tractor officers?
Ooh, I like where your head's at, Ty. That's kind of what I was thinking of, like a joint application, get 2 for 1, the 1-2 Tim Ty punch.
We have approximately 1 hour per week available to contribute to this role. But it would be pretty fun. So I love it. If anyone is applying for this role, I just want to hear from you. I want to talk to you. Please reach out. I would love to help you in any way I can with my 1 hour per week, but really cool. It would be awesome to see someone we know get awarded chief tractor officer, even though I think that we are the perfect 2-man crew for the job.
Ty, if it was 10 years ago, we didn't have families, we didn't have the podcast going on, we had more bandwidth, this would have been our ideal role in our early 20s, but it might just be a little bit past our prime for this. All right, Ty, let's jump into this conversation with Chris. Just a fascinating conversation really about quantifying soil carbon. Chris has an awesome background coming into the space from a design perspective and really is creating a new platform to really quantify regenerative agriculture and soil sequestration. So it was really cool to him talk about kind of their mixture of software and hardware and applications and where they're getting started. Just a classic ag tech journey, but really like Chris's perspective and attitude building in the space.
Yeah, commercializing science is really what he's focused on in his career. And this is his first foray into ag. And man, a substantial one, trying to quantify soil carbon and make it easy and inexpensive. And we get into all of that as far as the go-to-market and where they're at in the process. So you guys are going to love this conversation. Let's jump in with what's top of mind for Chris.
I have 2 things top of mind. One is soil carbon in the trough of disillusionment, and the other is whether capitalism is actually the problem, not climate change. We don't have time to dig into both of those in depth, but that's what's top of mind for me.
Let's try. Let's first let's go the first one, the trough of disillusionment. Let's dig into that. Tell me about that.
I mean, Indigo raised infinity dollars and largely hasn't delivered. And I will attempt at least to never be an entrepreneur that poops on another founder's vision, because you gotta have vision, right? And if it worked, we'd be saying, wow, what a genius. nonetheless, like, wow, a lot of the things didn't work. So I am simultaneously really grateful that a lot of that money raised the visibility of a lot of the ways that they are thinking differently about, especially climate. To be clear, I have no background in agriculture. So the only parts of Indigo's business that I even really have any clue about is the kind of soil carbon offsets and scope 3 stuff. There's a lot of very cool stuff they were doing more broadly in ag that was less directly climate that I'm less familiar with. But what happens in so many hype cycles is that a singularly well-funded, exceptionally visible, because of the aforementioned funding company, promises the world, as startups are wont to do, and that Yardstick certainly does in many ways as well, and then doesn't deliver, and everyone attributes that to it being a bad idea, right? Rather than bad execution or bad incentives or macro uncertainty that no one can really control. So my concern there is that I think there's a lot of folks that are broadly dismissing the role of alternative agricultural futures to address climate change compellingly. When, in my perspective, a lot of what has been challenging at Indigo reveals a much narrower sort of like root cause, and one that doesn't discourage me that what Yardstick is working on could still be part of that transformational opportunity. But, what percentage of people dig deeply? Like, not a lot, right? It's hard. You got too much information and not enough time. And I do my own version of that exact thing. I just happen to be paying attention to this one thing where people are being, I think, broadly pessimistic in a way that I find both deserved and kind of a bummer.
Yeah, super good insights there. Like, would love to kind of just get the lay of the land as it relates to kind of like quantifying carbon in the soil. Like, this has been talked about the past couple of years, like with the, I guess, like increased consumer awareness around regenerative and the impacts of climate and all of that. Like, how do we track and measure this? So maybe talk to us about like your approach, what other approaches exist in the marketplace, because it's challenging, like wearing the farmer hat of like there's all these different companies offering different solutions, and it's like where do you really anchor to right now with how like complex the market is, and it's still like not fully baked in a lot of areas.
Yep. And again, the joke I always make is I know a lot about measuring soil carbon. I don't know a lot about farming. There are other people at Yardstick who know a lot about farming, but it definitely ain't me. So if you're listening to this and you're like, that guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, like, yeah, you're probably right. That said, we focus on measuring soil carbon proximally, which means boots on the ground, in-field, touch the soil, it's local. That's in contrast to two other particular approaches, one being biogeochemical modeling, using software to basically do if-then statements, mostly around management practice changes, and remote sensing, using data that's collected via drones, airplanes, satellites, et cetera. All three of these approaches are building on a foundation of the current gold standard approach, which is typically called combustion. That's laboratory analysis. So you're sending physical soil samples to the lab. We can include a video in the show notes if you like, but our approach is we basically take a movie of the soil. It looks like a big ass hand drill. And as we drill into the soil, we're recording a spectral movie, a spectroscopic movie of the soil. And from that movie, we tell you the same thing that a lab tells you, just way cheaper, and obviously with none of the nonsense of going to the lab. So our goal is to improve our characterization of the spatial variability of soil carbon, which is very high. There's lots of variability, even in a small farm, while simultaneously reducing the cost. And the main way that we are distinct, not necessarily better, to be clear, but distinct from biogeochemical modeling and then remote sensing approaches are that soil carbon is underground and satellites can't see underground. So we are there in field. That's annoying because I have to go there. That's expensive compared to a piece of software, but we are team proximal, ride or die, because ultimately we believe that that's the foundation of understanding soils.
So excited to dig into this more, but how did you get here, Chris? How did you end up, founding a company all about soil? What's your background and what led you to this?
My background is art school. I have a bachelor's of fine arts degree in furniture making from RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. Ironically, I studied furniture design and not industrial design at RISD because I thought industrial design was too commercial. And here I am, the business guy. So I still definitely self-identify as a designer. I'm just like the designer of the enterprise rather than the product. And largely ended up here because I was part of a team working on an amazing solar product, and we were all product people. And there's this thing around a product called a business model, and it really matters. And we didn't have one. And so I knew we weren't going to have impact unless I could design that other thing as well. So I got my MBA. That company was science commercialization. So that's how I got bit specifically by the science commercialization bug. And that's what I've focused on, not entirely since, but largely since, and definitely the last decade or so as a founder, CEO. So my jam is being the business guy alongside a co-founding engineer, scientist. I had sold my prior company in early 2020. It's completely different. It was sunscreen gummies. They totally work. It's crazy. We don't have time to talk about it. Derm researcher here in Boston is who I found to make that company, and wanted to focus only on climate for a next founding role. So I joined the My Climate Journey Slack group, which is Jason Jacobs, his awesome climate podcast. Summer 2020 was suboptimal networking around researchers in Boston, shall we say. So I was pretty literally in the MCJ Slack group, just being like, you look like a scientist. Do you have technology? I can make money. I know how to company. Do you want that? Do you want to become one of those? And you do that enough and someone's like, yeah. And that person was Kevin Meissner, who is now my co-founder, CTO. He had already built a relationship with a woman named Christine Morgan, who's world-class soil scientists that have been working on the technology for 15 years at that point. So classic tech to market, not quite a spin out in that we're not actually exiting the university with her, but the original research absolutely came out of her work at Texas A&M. And she continues to be our primary scientific advisor and sort of spiritual leader, even as I am the titular leader of Yardstick, the startup.
Love it. One of the more interesting backgrounds we've had on the podcast. Super awesome journey with how you got here. And I think that's what agriculture needs, is like new perspectives, innovation from other areas of domain expertise. So that's awesome to hear.
Thank you. I mean, I think coastal tech types like me should listen to farmers. So somewhere in between, like we've probably got the total package.
This is where the innovation happens. Want to dig into the business model a little bit, Chris? Like, it's a super interesting area. Like last week, we were doing basically our pre-plant soil testing. So I'm literally in the field in 5 of our different fields, trying to get soil samples, like literally with a shovel, digging 3 different areas, putting them in plastic bags and mailing them to Nebraska. It's just like this very like archaic system of like how you collect that data. Like, talk to us about the business model of how you're really like leveraging this on farms.
Yep. So in the US, we're a service. When we started the company, we thought for sure make a better piece of hardware, and then there will be lots of awesome companies to sell it to. And we were wrong. And so in the absence of, I mean, to be clear, there are lots of amazing field service organizations in the country. They're just not oriented towards the particular puzzle of carbon the way we are as an organization. And so we realized, whether for lack of sophistication or for lack of focus, I'm not going to hand my baby to somebody else and ensure and hope that they're going to ensure a great customer experience. So we've built out our own field team in the US. We do all our own deployment. That means we make the hardware and the software, and then it's also Yardstick people holding Yardstick things in field. That means our services are priced on a per acre or per sample site basis. It's just arithmetic to move between the two. Obviously, you've got sort of fixed acres, fixed sample sites. And the P&L of our customer's brain is just oriented, differently, hence the 2 options. But that means our customers are saying, here's 100,000 acres, here's 1 million acres of boundaries, put it on easy mode, right? Like, do all the stuff so that I don't have to do it and I can check the methodological alignment box. That means we do stratification and sample plan design. We do all the field work. There is a laboratory component to training our instrument. We also do conventional stocks via labs. So all lab coordination and then stock reporting. And again, I can put a link in the show notes to what a stock report looks like when it comes back from us. But that's our deliverable. Congratulations, your X acres, your Y tons of soil carbon, and then changes over time as we get there eventually as well.
Okay, so this seems like a really tough challenge to commercialize this. I can think of a few. And maybe we could talk about a few of them. One is just like the technical risk of overcoming, making sure that you're getting the right measurement. So maybe you can speak through kind of the development of the technical piece, where you guys are at there. And then the other piece I would love to dig into, which you already hit on a little bit, is just the operational piece of how you get boots on the ground and then deploy this at scale.
So second part first, it's just like planes and trucks and well-trained, brilliant people. There's nothing fancy in the sense of like whiz-bang novel technology there. It's just the best people and the people who care the most. And to be clear, it's a combination of like, we'll absolutely follow instructions because SOPs are there for a reason, and can improvise when we need to improvise because like shit always goes wrong. especially if you're in the middle of nowhere, Montana, on a ranch, and there's not a hospital within 4 hours, right? So the deployment of our technology in field looks the same as any other field services organization. It's trucks and trailers and ATVs. We just happen to be carrying this particularly novel piece of hardware. And then we're engaging with sort of, mobile apps and other pieces of technology from a sample plan coordination perspective, more so than others. When we started the company, it was because there was already a strong basis of literature that was establishing in situ spectroscopy as the most, or at least among the most promising candidates for measuring soil carbon at low cost and high rigor. It's not the only technology. There are some others. But the whole reason we started the company with Christine on the basis of her research is that there was already overwhelming confidence that if anything's going to be able to do it, it's reflectance vis and IR spectroscopy, which is what we deploy. So Yardstick's real technical innovation and technical risk is primarily translational. The proof of concept is there in 3 decades of literature on soil spectroscopy. And, if you are a soil spectroscopist listening, all right, different geographies, different crop types, different wavelengths, absolutely. Nonetheless, on balance, this is the thing that's most likely to go the distance. And so our technical risk to beat down is, can we take a janky ass instrument that was made to do a single postdoc and turn it into something where you can push the buy button and Max, who leads our field team, will be at your farm, a week later. So durability, interchangeability, combining these pieces of sample plan design, for example, in field services, that's another thing we did not think we would have to do. We thought, make a great instrument, and surely the geospatial statistics of how to think about sample planning for soil carbon are figured out. They are not. And so all of a sudden we're like, oh my gosh, we got to do that piece too. That's really where the integrated nature of our offering has come from, where we have realized our customers want to hand us polygons and literally not think about it again until a stock report comes back in the door. The way we've approached that is tech, hard tech R&D like anybody else, iterating. My amazing CTO co-founder, Kevin, I mentioned, he's former SpaceX, he's former Planet Labs. So he is schooled in the world of how to do hardware. He puts satellites in space. And, it turns out soil spectroscopy is actually in many ways way harder than rocket physics. You generally know what's going to happen when you send a rocket up into the air, and you really don't know what happens underground. But it's many of the same principles of high quality hardware development that he learned at these other companies and now deploys it at Yardstick. The last place is that our tech development has been enormously multidisciplinary. We need to be incredible at geospatial statistics. We need to be incredible at chemometrics, which is a lot of the discipline behind spectroscopy. We need to be incredible mechanical engineers. We need to do optical engineering. We need to have great machine learning because that's how we train on combustion. We also need to tell the story well and simplify well. We need to do great field work. We need to have awesome soil science that helps us understand where our technology is going to be suitable or not suitable. And it's hard to make different people work together well, especially when I don't have a technical background. So besides the fundamental science risk of the technology itself, one challenge and one great joy for me has been to see us be able to pull together so many different people, none of whom, except our soil scientists, have any background in this stuff whatsoever, and to really start to see results and we have a paper in review right now at the leading soil science journal in the world, showing the results of our technology that really builds on the foundation of decades of work from Christine Morgan and others.
Awesome. Love that, and great overview that I think explains a lot. Chris, let's get into just the market here. So you're fundamentally measuring carbon in the soil. There's been a massive movement within agriculture related to climate farming, climate smart, regenerative agriculture. So is the idea here is you believe in the tailwinds there, that more and more farmers are going to want and maybe in some cases be required to measure their carbon over time? Talk to us about where the market has moved and the adoption of these measurements.
Yeah. So it's important to disambiguate a lot of the different things you just said, right? Regen ag is not the same. First of all, regen ag is not the same thing as regen ag. Okay, great. Putting that aside, that's not the same thing as soil carbon, which is not the same thing as soil health, which is not the same thing as carbon farming, which is not the same thing as low carbon intensity. Our theory is that direct measurement of soil carbon is going to be important to all of these efforts. And what all these efforts have in common is an acknowledgement that the conditions of the soil are influential on the total output of the soil system, which is both food, kind of food, for fuels or other animals' food, and then other ecosystem services. And they all matter. They're all being valued differently today. We very happily sort of code switch between, for example, a climate change conversation and a soil health conversation because, thank you, Soil Health Institute, Christine Morgan's organization, they're meaningfully the same thing. They're not exactly the same thing, but all of a sudden I can have a conversation with somebody here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, who's riled up that agriculture is 15 to 25% of our emissions. And how are we going to do it? Same way as I can have a conversation with somebody in Iowa that doesn't give a shit about greenhouse emissions, but definitely agrees that they have a soil health crisis. So that's number one, is from a market development perspective, I think companies working in agriculture who only have a CO2e story to tell will be as successful as the dominance of that story relative to the success of that story being dominant. And it will not be dominant for a lot of the conversation, both because it's already not dominant in the minds of a lot of agricultural operators, and different presidents have different outcomes, right? So the durability of Yardstick as enabling technology being one level above only, quote unquote, the climate change problem is really important to us. I don't know what we would do in a Trump administration, but I'm confident that people would still believe in soil health. Would that be scary and hard for a whole bunch of reasons? I'm not speaking on behalf of Yardstick, but it would be. Nonetheless, I don't think it would be game over for us in some of the ways that I might worry about other approaches. The second is the trajectory I mentioned previously that really narrowly defines the opportunity as voluntary carbon market, soil carbon offsets. That is one of many different ways that we can connect the market and these forces of climate change and soil health. It is an important one. It's not going all the way away anytime soon. And the last few years have been tough, both because of the incredibly high profile and modest success of Indigo's VCM effort, and the ongoing and high quality criticism of historical nature-based solutions offset markets. Now, a lot of that, to be clear, is forestry rather than agricultural soils, but in the eyes of many buyers, they're kind of too close to be comfortable. So a lot of folks buying in the VCM, voluntary carbon marketplace, they've said ooh, if natural systems are complex, maybe I should look at engineered carbon removal instead of getting mucked up in all of that hard to predict forestry and soil stuff. Unfortunately, I think that's conflating a lot of the specific methodological challenges of forestry with agricultural soils. And I feel very strongly that a lot of methodologies that Indigo, for example, is working with address a lot of those criticisms. But nonetheless, 3 years ago, I thought VCM was going to be our home run. And it's not. It's not dead, but it is trough of disillusionment. And of course, you also see emerging sort of child expressions of that. So you see, Andy's Bio looking more at inorganic carbon. You see enhanced rock weathering that's trying to work on agricultural soils, but address the durability and reversibility concerns very differently. Nonetheless, overall market development number two is that the VCM is not going to be our one shot opportunity. The third is, what's an alternative? And that's the rise of so-called Scope 3 or insetting programs. Yardstick customers include Organic Valley and General Mills, and they're not trying to sell offsets. So why are they measuring soil carbon? And it's because many food and ag brands have realized 80-90% of their emissions are Scope 3. Which means they can put solar panels on their roof all day long and it won't matter, because the only thing that matters if you're Organic Valley is the milk that's coming in the door. And you don't grow any of that milk. So you're looking at your emissions and you're all of my emissions are in the hands of someone else. How do I influence them to behave differently? And this is where the conversation shifts from selling offsets to direct decarbonization of one's own supply chain. What Organic Valley wants to be able to do is to buy lower carbon intensity milk, right? For every gallon that comes in the door, they want there to be fewer tons that come along with that gallon. And that's great because now we're aligning their supply chain for milk with their supply chain for ecosystem services. And that's great. I want the same people involved. And it's cleaning up your own backyard. I love that. And who's going to have more influence on a dairy? Organic Valley, who buys from them, or like Indigo in Boston, who's showing up at some random dairies saying like, hey, please make milk differently, right? I love that alignment. We love Scope 3 work. We're really proud to have a bunch of awesome customers in that regard. I sure wish, there was a lot more stick or a lot more carrot, because neither of them is like strong enough that it's like, let's go. It's time to scale these efforts. And I know, especially in agricultural communities, we quote unquote prefer carrot to stick. But I would say the main challenge in that third momentum of insetting in Scope 3 is that we still don't have the economics that will really lead to system scale transformation, even as I continue to be really encouraged to see the bright spots of that initial experimentation come to light and to see us be part of that equation.
Chris, where are you seeing the biggest penetration in terms of like geography and crops? Obviously, like agriculture is very complex, a lot of different crops going on. Like on our farm, we have this annual rotation system. And sometimes these tools, like when we're trying to do a Comet planter, just seems like it's built for like Midwest row crops or something.
Well, it literally is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it seems that way, is like, it is. And therefore it's a poor fit for a lot of what you're doing and you feel it, right? Many other methodologies operate similarly, right? They're designed for specific contexts. And that means most of our work is on broadacre commodity stuff and then grazing lands. I'd say about, fall 23, it was about 50-50. We have a grant from CDFA, California Department of Food and Agriculture, to look at soil carbon on produce land. So we do a little bit of work in higher value produce in the Central Valley. But honestly, that's only because CDFA pays us to. We don't have like paying customers there that would be commercially attractive anywhere. And that's tough.
Yeah, what is the challenge there of like in our situation, like we have a field that is in garlic this year that's on a certain bed configuration with a certain irrigation style. And like next year, we might have to put in a different furrow setup. We might put in drip tape that it's at a different depth and a different crop. And like year over year, it's just kind of hard to extrapolate trends when you have that kind of diversity. But like on the other hand, like crop rotations are a key tenet of regenerative agriculture and like having that biodiversity. So it's kind of like a lot of different things going on. Like how do you solve for like that kind of a situation, do you think?
Yeah, I don't know is a short answer. And this is where in the interview, people on my team are like, oh no, is Chris going to start talking about farming? But I can say with confidence that like all of that complexity that you just described means if I'm designing a methodology, and let's ignore whether it's for offsets or insets, but one way or another, there's a document that says, if you do this stuff, there will be some economic upside. Let's call that a methodology. If I'm designing a methodology, I stack rank the dollars and acres of America by crop. And your beautiful polyculture intercropped complex thing is like line item number like 73 after like, I don't know, sorghum. I don't know. Sorghum's actually probably top 10. That's a bad example. But you get my point. Like a lot of what you're doing is the exception to the rule because you understand the opportunity and it's in your particular location that enables that. That means most of these methodologies are written for corn and soy, kind of wheat in the Midwest. So when I, as a farming dumb person, come to you and I say, hey, will you please join my soil carbon program? All you have to do is adopt cover cropping. And you're like, cover cropping? Like, what the hell are you talking about? Like I'm in Florida. Like I got multiple seasons a year. And that like actually happens both because the methodologies are designed to appeal to the largest number of acres, and the people that are deploying them are largely being given a piece of paper and said, like, go smash phones and bang on doors until you find people who can say yes. And instead, the sort of like nuance and fit for purpose approach that would make your operation work with some of these programs is just, wow, that is a complex, bespoke approach, which is not worth the complexity and cost to a large project developer who otherwise can feel like, it would be better to just find like 1 million acres of soy across the I-states. And I'm not sure that they're right or wrong, either in terms of like commercial potential or climate impact, but that's why, you are unsurprised to feel like a lot of these programs are not designed to reflect the complexity and beauty, to be clear, of your operation, because they're not. And that also means my customers similarly are heavily concentrated in relative, quote unquote, relatively uninspiring land use conditions.
Super interesting. All right. Well, I'm going to switch gears here. I'm interested for your perspective. Chris, what's your food or ag hot take?
So one of mine is that industrial agriculture is actually the most amazing thing that's ever happened to humanity. So I love to put on the hat of green revolution booster. It's all about calories per acre, especially because I see a lot of regen ag people sort of repeating the organic Whole Foods playbook, and it'll be marginal and it'll just be a premium rutabaga for white people in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I live. But I think the deeper point there is I'm greatly concerned that a lot of folks in the regen ag soil carbon movement ignore caloric density, ignore population growth, ignore leakage and the marginal land problem. Cool, carbon negative beef on 3 times the land. Where the hell is all that land coming from? It's coming from Brazil, and it was rainforest before it was beef. That's the short answer. So that's number one. Number two is, in my very small piece of the ecosystem, which is politically left coastal tech and yet agriculture, I think there's a lot of engineer reductive brain thinking about complex natural systems that farmers and ranchers and other people who work on land actually understand very deeply and intrinsically. And I think there is a strong habit of trying to treat natural systems, and especially agricultural soil systems, as reducible to a spreadsheet model of what happens to pH when I apply these different chemicals. And it is in some ways. That's why chemistry is amazing, because you're using numbers, right? It's important. Turns out chemistry works in a lot of instances. But I am often shocked by how a lot of people with my background and my worldview talk about agricultural transformation without any real clue about what actually happens on farms, not just chemically, but also culturally. The Soil Health Institute, again, is the organization where our lead scientific advisor works. And they've done amazing work about the ethnography of transitioning to regenerative systems. They did this one amazing piece of work, which I'm probably misquoting. And so if they listen to this, you can correct me. But and it was basically about what are the conditions under which people attempt regenerative transitions? What's predictive of your likelihood to try? And the thing that was the single most highly predictive criteria as a farmer, I think they were mostly looking at row crops and the Midwest stuff, was have your parents died? Which is whoa, that tells you something about the human reality of all systems, agriculture included, right? And that plays into a lot of the stories that I'm familiar with as a coastal person of it's a family business and you don't want to let your mom and dad, okay, it turns out there's truth to a lot of that. And all of a sudden, all the scientists of the world trying to engineer a new organism, a new varietal, a new tax plan, and you're your parents being alive or dead may be the single biggest lever. I don't know what you do with that, to be clear. I'm not advocating for killing parents, but wow, I think that should help a lot of tech bros like myself sort of step back and be maybe robots aren't a top 10 enabler here. Maybe they are, right? I really don't know, but my other hot take is I really want folks to pause and ensure that they are operating in proximity to the people and culture and process that they want to influence.
Good stuff, Chris. Well, last one as we wrap up here. Ty and I are always brainstorming business ideas. You have a super eclectic background. If you weren't focusing on the carbon space of food and ag, what other business ideas get you excited in the space? What else would you build?
Yeah, I think one thing that I am really keen on, and I'm not sure this is a business so much as a problem that I would be keen to likely work on, is that the agricultural economy in my extremely limited view, exhibits a lot of the same dysfunction of a lot of our economy in its short-termism. And back to one of the first things I talked about, like, is capitalism really the problem? I'm really drawn towards the fact that our agricultural system is land-based and therefore inseparable from country identity and like not movable, right? Like, you can change your mind about where you put your photovoltaic factory. Like, you can change your mind about where you grow soy, but like Iowa will still be there, presumably with its lovely soils. And so if this is fundamentally a more durable asset, and also culturally, literally the way many people think about the definition of a country, right? It's a place, it's land. And of course, even in the United States, right? Many people disagree about whose land it really is in many, many parts of the country. It's there and it's not going anywhere. And so is agriculture an opportunity to think differently about an economy that more appropriately values the long term? And especially in my world, I see very strong evidence that if someone were able to bear decadal scale risk, a lot of transformations would actually happen. I think there's a lot less disagreement about what's possible after 10 years, even as there's tons of disagreement about what's possible after 2 years and who's going to bear the uncertainty of years, 2 and 3. So I don't know what that company is. It's almost definitely not a technology, but what work can be done to use land to tell a better story about long-termism that simultaneously preserves and expands the kind of agricultural beauty and complexity of America while addressing many of the fundamentally long-term risks of soil health and climate change that we face and continue to really struggle to activate on at scale.
My takeaway from this episode is something that I have a takeaway all the time of just how complex and unique agriculture is.
Yeah.
It's really one of a kind with the relational aspect. The soil is this living thing, and you have all these different pieces of it. And just the fact that land, you can grow certain things and that you can't move the land. And it constantly blows my mind. But Chris, we really appreciate the time. How can listeners get in touch and connect with you and everything you've got going on with Yardstick?
I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn and use yardstick.com.
So Ty, what do you think?
Yardstick is, I think, a really interesting company in a really interesting market of measuring soil carbon that we think is going to get increasingly more important. It just in this whole regenerative ag focus on carbon conversation. And I like how he differentiated even between those things. So be sure to check them out. Their website will be linked in the show notes. All right, guys, we appreciate you listening. Chief Tractor Officers out there, for your first order of business is to come on the Modern Acre podcast. So we want to hear from you if you're applying. We'll be back with another great podcast next week.